is Melanie Nevis.
And I'm Tegan Aline.
And we are going to continue our discussion of saints. And I see that Tegan is joined by her cat, Izzy, purring away. I don't think
hear her?
purrs are, no.
Okay, because I can hear her and I'm just like, girl. Maybe that should be our theme music from now on. Or maybe Kale should add that into our theme music. Just add like the subtle purr of a cat because they're always involved.
They're always involved. Mine is sleeping beside me right now.
They have their own podcast going on and we didn't even know.
I know. Always just making the biscuits.
Yeah, for real.
So I was trying to decide which saint to do research on and which saint I was even gonna like do for this episode because I've got two prepared. But I feel like we've been chatting about women a lot.
We have, as we tend to do, yeah.
But I'm gonna switch it up a little bit and focus on Saint Francis of Assisi. Very, very
Yay! Oh my god, I just freaked my cat out so bad. She's like, "What the fuck?" I love Saint Francis of Assisi.
Okay, good.
Him. Yeah, he's one of my
because
faves.
he's actually really cool. He's actually really interesting.
I think my mom was named after him, actually, to be honest.
Is your mom's name Frances?
Her, like, she goes by the name
Franny?
Brenda, but her born name is Frances, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Why do you like Francis?
Isn't he the patron saint of animals?
Yeah.
He is, right?
Yeah.
So I know about him from my mom. My mom has always told me she was named after him. And I remember learning basically when I had to do my confirmation in school, a lot of people really like the name Francis because of his patronage, because his patronage is like related to animals. But that's all I know, and I don't know the details, and I'm just like super excited that you picked him.
Yeah, because I think that he's also been pretty influential. I mean, Franciscans are kind of like named after him. He's a pretty influential character and
what are Franciscans?
Okay, so we'll go into this.
I'm just gonna be honest. I might have a vague idea, but I don't think I know. Okay, you're gonna talk about it. Cool.
So yeah, I'll go into it. But you've heard of them, right?
I have heard of
the
them.
Franciscan monks. Okay,
like I've heard of Franciscans, Benedictines, and then the really scary ones are the Dominicans. I don't know.
Yeah. So we won't go into all of that so much. We won't go into all of that. But yeah. Okay, so Saint Francis of Assisi. So he was born around 1181. He was born in Assisi. That's why he is of Assisi in Umbria in Italy. But he was born as Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone.
I didn't even realize he was Italian. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
His father, Pietro Bernardone, had returned from a trip to France to find out that his wife, who was a beautiful French woman, had given birth to a son. Rather than being excited or apologetic because he'd been gone and missed the birth of his son, he was furious because she had baptized his son as Giovanni. And Giovanni is the Italian name for John, after John the Baptist. And Pietro did not want his son to grow up as a man of God. He wanted his son to follow after him. He was a man of business. He was a merchant cloth. And he wanted a son who would reflect his infatuation with the trade, with business, with France as well. He was like obsessed with France. He went and got a French wife. He had just come back from France when his son was born. He was like obsessed with France.
Wow, this is already so juicy. Wow, okay. I had no idea.
He renamed his son from Giovanni, no more John. He renamed him to Francesco, which is the equivalent of calling him Frenchman.
Oh, wow. Oh, gosh. Okay. Wild. Wild.
Okay. But I'm just going to call him Francis because that's how we know him.
Yeah, sure.
So that is like how he was first brought into the world. Okay.
Mhm.
And because of his father's wealth, because he was a very successful cloth merchant, Francis really enjoyed a life of luxury as he was growing up.
Mm.
He like kind of learned everything that went along with being wealthy and affluent, and he, learned skills of archery, he wrestled, he became a horseman, learned about horsemanship, he indulged himself with food and wine and had these wild epic celebrations. And
Mm.
by the time he was 14, he had left school and became known for being like this rebellious teenager who frequently drank and partied and would
Wow,
break the city curfew.
I did not see this coming. Seriously, he was like a
Yeah,
rebel rouser. Oh, because his dad was like kind of an influencing more that route than a godly route.
100%.
Wild.
His dad was like, I do not want my son to be a son of God. I don't want him to be a man of the church. And so Francis was really known for his charm, also a little bit of vanity, but like everyone liked him. Everyone allowed him to get away with the shit that he pulled. And from a very young age, you could tell that he was this natural born leader.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was like the leader of a crowd of young people who would spend their nights in wild parties. Like he was kind of like the leader of the gang, the rebel rouser.
At 14?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is such a far cry from where we just came from with Joan of Arc. But anyway, wow. Okay.
yeah. So, like, and totally not what you would think of when you first think of a saint, especially a saint that is so well known.
Yeah, for real. I'm so surprised,
And
honestly.
Thomas of Solano, who was his biographer, knew him really well, obviously. He had written his biography for him and recorded things, and said that in other respects, an exquisite youth, he attracted to himself a whole retinue of young people addicted to evil and accustomed to vice.
Whoa.
And Francis himself had said, I lived in sin during that time. So
Mm,
much later, Francis like looks back on his youth, on his childhood, and he was like, no, I was living in sin. I was sinful. I was doing, you know, things that
the
are
shit.
evil.
Yeah.
The shit.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we all kind of reflect, maybe not that extremely, but as we all reflect like that at one point.
I mean, here's the thing. He
We're
just
all
sounds
18
like
once,
a
as somebody said to
14-year-old
me the other
wanting to
day.
get into trouble and have fun.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
really. He didn't do anything particularly bad. He like had wild parties.
Yeah.
He just sounds like a teenager who may have been a bit of a shit and was very privileged as well.
Yeah.
So, Francis has basically fulfilled every hope of his father Pietro. Right?
Yeah, I
Like,
guess
and
so.
he fell in love with France as well. So he loved the songs of France. He loved the romance of France. He loved the free, adventurous troubadours of France who
Oh
wandered throughout
boy.
the rest of Europe.
Not the
And
troubadours.
the troubadours, yeah.
Where
And he
what
was
time period was this in? Sorry?
so he was born around 1181.
Okay. Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay.
late 1100s. Um, and he was also really good at business. He had learned from his father,
Mhm.
and his dad was really pleased with this. But he was good at it, but he was bored with it. Okay?
Mm.
So Francis wanted a lot more than just like wealth and the prospect of life in the cloth trade. He took a look around and was like, the people who are medieval heroes, let's say, are the nobles, like the
Mhm.
knights.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, he was just like, knights are the medieval action heroes.
Right. Fair enough.
I want to be a leader like them. I want to be a war hero like them.
Wow.
And the only place to do that, if you're not like born into it, is through battle. Battle is the best place to win the glory and prestige that he longed for.
Mhm.
So he was really bored with where he was at, and he was like, knights are really cool. How do I do that? And before long,
Today's
The
equivalent of a
opportunity,
DJ.
yeah,
I could do
pretty
that.
much. I could do that.
Yeah.
Before long, the opportunity for war beckoned. So in
Sure.
1202, war broke out between longtime enemies Assisi and the nearby town of Perugia. And Francis was just like, I can fight for Assisi. I'm going to take my place with the cavalry.
Oh
And
boy.
he did. But Francis and the men of Assisi came under very heavy attack. And in the face of superior numbers, most of them took flight because they couldn't, they were losing. The battlefield was covered with bodies of butchered and mutilated men, people
Mm,
screaming in agony. Assisi just didn't have the numbers. Like most of any surviving troops were pretty much immediately put to death.
yeah.
But any who were wealthy enough to be ransomed were taken prisoner.
Oh no.
Francis, his dad was wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
He was dressed in the finest cloth. He was dressed in the finest material.
Mm-hmm.
And so they thought that he was noble. They were like, he's wearing nice enough stuff to be noble. So they took him. And all of a sudden, Francis is among nobility like he always wanted to be, but in a dank underground cell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he basically spends nearly a year in pretty miserable conditions
Wow.
awaiting his father's payment for his ransom.
Oh my
And
gosh.
during this time, he becomes really ill. And he also says that it was during this time that he first began to receive visions from God. And so,
Childhood dreams dashed like
yeah,
immediately. By the
yeah,
way, your chase of glory was dumb. Now you might
yeah,
die. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's funny how you can see a character like that and be like, this guy sounds like a tool, and then but you could still feel bad for him because we've all been naive and then had the
sure.
harshness of like reality set in and be like, this was a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I
And
feel
I
for
think
him.
that's exactly kind of what it was. Like
Yeah.
this was a little bit of a mistake,
Hmm.
especially when you're sitting in this place surrounded by a bunch of rich people. You're going to start to reflect, was this is this really what I want? Like why did I want this? Also, I feel like shit. I'm really sick right now.
Yeah.
Um Unlike a lot of saints that we know of, once they start to receive visions from God, they kind of transition almost immediately,
Hmm.
right? Like
Right.
they transition almost immediately and they're like, this is the voice of God. I'm going to do exactly what it says. I mean, Joan of Arc was kind of the same way. She received these visions and she was like, okay, this is it.
Yeah.
He like started to receive the visions, but it didn't really sink in. Like his conversion takes a bit of time. So he, in 1203, finally is ransomed and accepts his ransom was accepted, and he is released from prison. And he comes
Hmm.
back to Assisi as a different person. He's still pretty
Traumatized.
dangerously sick.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Oh, traumatized.
Yeah, yeah, he's still sick in both body and mind. He
Mm-hmm.
is like this battle fatigued casualty of war. He probably saw a lot of things that he wasn't really prepared for. This is the first time that he had ever been in a battle, and his side was demolished. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, that is going to be a traumatic incident if you
Yeah.
have this fantasy or idea in your head of what it's going to be, and then
Yeah.
that's completely shattered.
Yeah. The glory of
So,
war is completely a propaganda.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
So legend has it that one day, while riding a horse in the local countryside, Francis encounters a leper. Prior to the war, Francis would have run from the leper. But on this
Sure.
occasion, his behavior was very, very different. And he kind of viewed this is like a slow conversion, right? So he starts to view
Right.
the leper as a symbol of moral consciousness.
Okay.
Or he was just like, what if this is like Jesus incognito? At least that's what some religious scholars think. They think
Right.
that he
I
was kind
I
of
get
like,
I
what
get that.
if?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if he had, it sounds like he did have some religious influence around him growing up. So, and of course,
For sure.
in the time where all the other things he's believed in the world have not really helped him, makes
Yeah,
sense that he would start questioning these things. Yeah, for sure.
exactly. So
Mm.
it's not an instant like I completely believe in God and the faith and whatever, but it's
Mhm.
definitely now he's going, I wonder,
Oh,
what if,
okay.
and
Yeah.
why is this person? So instead of running away from the leper, and remember, a leper is someone with leprosy. It is a very contagious disease that affects your skin and
Mhm.
nerves. It causes discoloration and lumps, and it's why they were ostracized from society, and why if you see one you do run away,
Yeah.
or like you would run away, especially at
Mhm.
that time when there's like no cure for it.
Highly contagious.
He
Yeah.
embraced the leper and he kissed him. And then later, he describes the feeling as experiencing a sweetness in his mouth when he did these things, when he like hugged and kissed the leper. And after
Mm.
this incident, Francis begins to feel a freedom. Like he just begins to
Hmm.
feel lighter.
Okay.
And his earlier lifestyle, which he was still kind of tethered to a little bit, being back
Mhm.
at home, his father was around and like still had that influence under him a little bit, but he was wrestling with it. But his earlier lifestyle starts to lose its appeal.
Sure, of course.
And like again, this process that started with war and imprisonment. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Of course. Yeah, you wouldn't be the same person after that and probably want to understand things a bit differently or maybe for the first time even.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
imagine as well, if you run into a leper and they're fully aware that they are a leper, and then you actually go out of your way to embrace them,
Yeah.
that person, that person's reaction to that is probably going to be like they may be crying because
Yeah.
someone's not afraid of them all of a sudden. They may be really emotional and grateful, and that for sure will impact you
He had
as
his
the
like
person giving the
first
hug.
experience of service in a way in a sense. It's not
Yeah,
like hugging someone like that. It's a it's an act of doing something for the sake of someone else. It's
exactly.
meaningful. Yeah.
It is meaningful. And so yeah, his earlier lifestyle begins to lose its appeal. So
Mhm.
now Francis is in his early 20s and he feels this freedom. And this is where his attention really starts turning more towards God, and he turns his focus towards God. So instead of working, he starts to spend an increasing amount of time in a remote mountain getaway in old quiet churches around Assisi. He's praying, he's looking for answers, he's like maybe meditating a little bit, who knows. He is helping nurse lepers all of a sudden. He really found like
Wow.
a pull and a call towards that.
Mhm.
And during this time, he's praying before an old Byzantine crucifix in the church of San Damiano. And then France hears this voice of Christ who tells him to rebuild the Christian church and to live a life of extreme poverty. And
Oh.
so he obeys and he devotes himself to Christianity. And he begins preaching around Assisi and was soon joined by like 12 loyal followers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
A lot of people thought Francis was a madman. Others
Sure.
viewed him as one of the greatest examples of how to live the Christian ideal since Jesus.
Uh-huh.
Because whether he was really touched by God or a man misinterpreting hallucinations brought on by mental illness or poor health, like we don't really know which one is which, but it doesn't matter because he became really well known throughout the Christian world in this time.
And he was acting in a good way towards people who needed
Yeah, he
it.
was
Yeah.
acting in a really good way towards people. He was acting, I'm surprised that he managed to get quite as many followers as he did because he was still interacting with lepers, which everyone was fearful of at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so he has this epiphany where he hears the voice of Christ tell him to rebuild the church. He doesn't have the money to do this.
Right.
So he takes a bolt of fabric from his father's shop and
Mhm.
sold it along with his horse to
Mm.
get money to repair the church. Learning of his son's actions, Pietro like
Yee.
basically just viewed it as an act of theft. And
Seriously?
yeah, he became furious, absolutely furious, and dragged Francis before the local bishop. And the bishop told Francis to return his father's money.
Hmm.
So his reaction to this was, yeah, to return the money and also to strip off his clothes. And he declared before the bishop that and his father that God was now the only father he recognized.
Oh, slammed right back.
Yeah.
Wow. Didn't see that
And
coming.
this event is really credited as Francis's final conversion. There were like lots of little things
Yeah,
kind of along the way, but this is the nail in the coffin in terms
right.
of the relationship with his father. And there's no indication anywhere that Francis and his father ever spoke again after this point. Remember, his like Pietro
Wow.
did not want a son of God, and
Hmm.
his son has declared God to be his only father.
Wow.
So that relationship is done. Now,
Wild.
the bishop couldn't have Francis walking around nude, so he gave him a rough tunic. And with
Yeah.
that, Francis left Assisi. Unfortunately, the very first people that he met on the road were this band of thieves that beat him up.
Oh no.
But he didn't really have anything. He was beaten, and despite that, he was still happy because from this point onward, he was truly free to live the life that he wanted, a
Right.
life according to the gospel,
That's so
right?
interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
he was able to like just do this. And at this time, the church was already incredibly wealthy, as were the leaders heading the church. Um, and this is something that concerned a lot of people, including Francis, and who felt that the long held apostolic ideals had really eroded. And so
Mm.
Francis kind of set out on this mission to restore Jesus Christ's own original values to the now very decadent church. So
Ooh, it's
he
giving
really
Cathar energy. Oh, that's
is it?
really yeah, because that's essentially what they did too, but in France. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So he really adopts this Christ-like poverty, which was very radical at the time. This very
Mhm.
radical concept where he's looking around going, this isn't what it's even supposed to be. Like this
Right.
is completely wrong. This is not what we're supposed to be striving towards.
Right.
And so remember, like Francis is a natural born leader with really high charisma points. And
Mm.
he's now going around preaching, but he's just wearing this tunic, like a brown robe, right? That you see.
Yeah.
He's just wearing this tunic. It's rough. It's not like a luxurious fabric that he grew up with. That's kind of all he's got. He goes off and meditates in caves or like prays in caves and does whatever.
Ooh.
And it's relatively isolated, but would preach in villages. So, like, before long, Francis would draw thousands of followers, and they listened to his sermons and they joined in his way of life. And the followers became known as the Franciscan friars. So, you asked about what the Francis are. There's this,
Okay.
they are a religious order of men, although there are also Franciscan sisters as well.
Okay.
Okay, but
Okay.
the Franciscans are a religious order, and there's still approximately 650,000 Franciscans in over 110 countries throughout the world today. And you hear
Wow.
Franciscan friars belonging to the Capuchin Franciscans or to the Order of the Friars Minor, the Third Order's Regular. Like
Oh,
but they all go
wow.
back to being Franciscans.
Right. Okay.
And they essentially just believe that they should be living in poverty and really preaching the gospel, and that we shouldn't be giving a bunch of wealth to the church and things like the church
Interesting.
should not be
Yeah.
wealthy because that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
what it's supposed to be about. So
Yeah.
that's what the order of the Franciscans are like. That's what that is based in. So he founds this that or he these people that flock to him become known as the Franciscan friars. So before long, he's preaching in up to 5 villages a day. He's teaching a new kind of emotional and personal Christian religion that everyday people can understand.
Okay,
And
yeah.
he even went so far as to preach to animals. And that
No
garnered
way.
criticism. That garnered criticism from some. It earned him the nickname God's Fool.
Oh,
But
wow.
his message was spread far and wide, and thousands of people were captivated by what they heard.
Mhm.
People are still captivated by what they heard then today.
Mhm.
And today, yeah, Saint Francis of Assisi is the patron saint of animals. He's the patron saint for ecologists, which
Oh,
is
really?
due
That's so
to his
funny.
love of animals and nature. And I kind of love that. Anyone who loves animals has some good qualities, some redeeming qualities to them,
I
I
just
think.
spent my entire day yesterday with a group of ecologists.
Oh, there you go. That's
Yeah,
funny.
that's funny.
And
Yeah.
in 1224, Francis reportedly received a vision that left him with the stigmata of Christ. So, the
Oh,
stigmata, for
yeah.
anyone who doesn't know, are
Ouch.
marks resembling the wounds of Jesus that he suffered when he was crucified. So, through the hands and the gaping lance wound in his side, through the feet. Um, and this made Francis the very first person to receive wounds of the Holy Stigmata.
Oh.
Apparently, they remained visible for the rest of his life,
Mm.
but uh, like science has progressed. And so there's a lot of scholars that are thinking that because of his earlier work in treating lepers, a lot of scholars now believe that the wounds were actually symptoms of leprosy. Remember that leaves open, gaping wounds.
I was thinking too
So,
because he was sick at the beginning of all of this, so he was working
yes,
with lepers when he probably had a weakened immune system as
exactly.
well. So,
Exactly. But wounds of the stigmata, because this
okay.
is like saint, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
we're gonna go with that with a grain of salt. Um,
Honestly, I'd hope it would be leprosy in a way over stigmata because stigmata is like torture, right?
I think like realistically, it makes sense that it would be leprosy, and
Yeah.
leprosy is not curable at the time. You would have those wounds for the rest of your life. They wouldn't
Mhm.
go away.
Mhm.
They might grow, actually.
Mhm.
So, as Francis approached his death, many predicted that he was a saint in the making, which a lot of the time, saints become saints once they are gone. But throughout his life, people were like, oh, he is a saint. Like, he's going to be a saint.
Oh, wow.
And when his health begins to decline more rapidly, he goes home. And knights were sent from Assisi to guard him and make sure that no one from neighboring towns would carry him off. Because remember, at the time, the body of a saint was viewed as an extremely valuable relic, and it
Right.
would bring glory to the town that it rested in.
Okay.
And like
Yeah,
you don't want to start cutting up body parts for bones and relics like right after someone has died.
for sure.
Anyways, so he has
Yeah.
knights guarding him.
Okay.
And Francis of Assisi died on October 3rd, 1226, at the age of 44.
Mhm.
So he
Oh,
wasn't
he was
super
kind of
old, but
he wasn't by our standards, but I feel like
by our
historical
standards, but
standards, he
he
was kinda old.
he, he lived a while.
Yeah.
And he died in Assisi in Italy, so back in his hometown. And today, Francis has a lasting renaissance with millions of followers throughout the globe still.
Mm.
He was canonized as a saint only 2 years after his death.
Wow.
So, like,
So
very fast turnaround to achieve sainthood.
wild.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
in 2013, Cardinal George Mario the Pope, as we know him now.
Try again. I you can do it.
I don't know, Bergoglio.
Okay.
I'm going to say it really Anglophone today, Bergoglio.
Okay.
It's not at all that, but that's what it is today.
Okay.
He chose to honor Saint Francis by taking the name and becoming Pope Francis. That is why the Pope today is Pope Francis. He decided to
Oh,
honor, he really respected Francis of Assisi, or
okay.
respects, because he's still known as Pope Francis. So why is Francis important? Like, he has established one of the most important Catholic orders in history for both brothers and sisters, upon
Mhm.
whom he imposed the same vow of poverty that he himself had taken.
Mm.
And he passionately preached the message of the Gospels throughout the world. He helped poor, hungry, and sick, particularly lepers. He did continue helping lepers. And he also, this is a fun little fact, invented the tradition, the Christmas tradition of the nativity scene.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh,
that wasn't really a thing.
oh, facts.
Yeah,
Interesting. Huh. Okay.
yeah.
Cool.
So, like, Francis is important in the
Yeah.
history of the church and just generally in the history of medieval Europeans, because Christianity was prominent at that point, because he
Mhm.
really offered an a different reality to medieval Christians than one that they had been experiencing.
Mhm.
One in which, and this is why I actually do really like Francis, one in which the natural world was a direct reflection of the goodness of God. Because since the fall of the Roman Empire in 476, the Catholic, or Latin Christian, as it was called at the time, church had preached and enforced this transcendental worldview in which anything that was not God or otherworldly or ethereal was evil. So this included the natural world. This included that anything material, anything that you could get your hands on, was nothing more than a distraction and a temptation luring souls off the path of righteousness and salvation. And Francis was opposed to that. Remember, he would spend his time going up and climbing up to mountains, or maybe not like full mountain ranges, but he would go up hilltops and be isolated and be
Mhm.
surrounded in nature. And he was claiming that the natural world was given to us and was a gift from God. And so
Mm.
it wasn't only good, but it was imbued with God himself. And nature
Mhm.
should not be shunned or ignored. It should be celebrated and revered. And humans are not here to dominate and control nature. We're supposed
Mhm.
to live in harmony with it. And
Mhm.
so to him, humans are no more important than an ant, no less important than an elephant. Like, we're on the same playing field.
Yeah.
And Francis didn't really use the word ecosystem because that word didn't exist in the
Exist.
13th
Yeah.
century. But I think that he probably would have. And I understand, knowing his viewpoint, why he is the patron saint of ecologists. And
Yeah.
I think that as we're seeing some of the more disastrous impacts of climate change increasing, it's a reminder that we should be working with rather than against nature. And, like, I don't think that's a bad reminder to have. I don't think that hurts.
No, absolutely not. That's so interesting. That is so wild. I
Yeah.
know, and I said in the beginning that he was giving like it was giving a little bit of Cathar energy, but I actually,
Hmm.
upon hearing the rest of it, um only to a certain degree, because the Cathars had such a wild take
Yeah.
on what the world actually was, and it wasn't considered a gift for them. But
No, because they
ultimately,
thought that the world was evil. Like, they thought that this was
hell. They
hell.
thought this was hell. And
Yeah.
that the church was at the forefront of it. But that whole vow of poverty and like kindness amongst each other, that part was relevant. And I couldn't help but listen to it and think, it's interesting, like what passes the grade for the Christian
Hmm.
church versus what doesn't, like it's just kind of
Yeah.
the core was probably similar, but the everything built around it was really different. So there we go.
Well, and that's how things, and this is why religion is so tricky, and
Yeah.
even spiritualism is so tricky, because inevitably I think humans are predisposed to believe in something. Like, our brains are made up that way. It's a
Yeah.
scientific fact. We are genetically programmed to believe in something.
Mhm.
And if you have a charismatic person, they can really turn that around and fuck with shit. And we've seen it throughout history time
Yeah,
and time again, where you've
absolutely.
got people
100%.
who are charismatic manage to make themselves or like get themselves into a position of authority, and that can be really great sometimes if they are doing wonderful things, and but like realistically more often than not it's proven to be detrimental.
Yeah, it's not often you see people use their charisma for good.
But yeah, I actually didn't know that much of Assisi other than that they did take this vow of poverty. And so I remember going when I was in Italy, I think it was in Rome, I went to go see Capuchin monks specifically because they actually like mummify the Capuchin monks and
Oh,
have them
cool.
all decorated in robes still
Mm.
in the churches and stuff, and it's really cool. But that was like my experience with them. Not every order of like Franciscans does that. The Capuchins specifically do. But I just knew that they lived in poverty. I did not know Assisi's or Francis's story of actually growing up a little rebel rouser. I think that is
That's
really
wild. Yeah, I
intriguing.
wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
And I really saw like within that, so in a lot of these stories we see like classic story kind of like tropes. I really saw
Mm-hmm.
that story trope of the young inhibited uninhibited teenager like doing his thing and then
Mm-hmm.
like having that reality, like having reality crash down around him. And I also saw that energy of like absolutely rejecting his father and the way that his father wanted him to be, and complete rebellion
Exactly.
against the ideals that his father held for him. It's very interesting.
He's got like quite a character arc for sure.
Yeah, I'll say,
Yeah.
which must be
Yeah.
why
He's
people
got
love
quite
him
the
so
character
much
arc.
though, because
I think so. I think
it's
so. It's a good
it's a
story.
relatable story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so
So there
interesting.
you
I
go.
think I think it's really in doing this podcast about the saints is really interesting because we tend to take things from a slightly like non-Christian take on most of the podcasts so far. And this is like the first time like I'm hearing I can isolate them from Christianity. I can isolate saints from Christianity. I think a lot of people do actually. But it's also like the first time where we're like hearing stories connected to Christianity that feel kind of like relatable and understandable, and you can humanize these people that inevitably became saints. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and then you kind of like, well, what's the criteria for becoming a saint again? And like you go over these things, and ultimately it just boils down to, I mean, in some cases it's a lot of helping the church or helping certain people become kings and whatever. But in a lot of cases it's just like, well, actually, no. I was gonna say in a lot of cases it's just being a good person, but I don't even think that's that because we have a lot of virgin martyrs as well, and they just decided to be married to God. And I think that honestly is a little delusional, but that's just me talking.
You're like, I don't personally get
I just take back everything I said. Please ignore
it.
it.
No, but it's true sometimes. And I think so far, at least in our diggings, we see that men can can contribute to society and to nature and to like the morality of people, and they can become that can be
Hmm.
considered saintly. And maybe
Yeah.
that's because of the way that society in general at the time just viewed men and women, right? Like women
Yeah.
are like, at least so far, when women have to go through like incredibly like vicious, violent, harrowing trials, men
Hmm.
have to become softer, which is really interesting when you think about it, because it's like women have to wade through the world of like the destructive masculine energy, and men seem to be
Hmm.
called to kind of like submit more to the almost like subtle feminine energy. At least that's what we're seeing in the stories that we've looked at so far. I don't know if that's consistent all the way
Yeah.
through, but that's interesting.
I'm sure it isn't, but I think that for a lot of them, it probably is. I'm
Yeah.
sure there are always exceptions to the rule, right?
Yeah, for sure. For
But
sure.
but the general pattern seems to be that.
Well,
So
that was
anyways,
really interesting. Yay.
Yeah.
I'm happy to learn
Yeah,
more
I'm
about
glad.
him.
Yeah. Yeah, I like him actually. I like I said,
I can
anyone
tell.
who's like good yeah, anyone who's gung-ho for animals and nature, I'm like, you're okay.
Exactly. Yeah. You're okay in my books. Yeah.
You're not all bad.
Yeah.
Because there can be some really terrible people that love animals too. So, but I'm gonna be like, well, you have got some redeemable quality. But overall, he seemed like a good dude.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, that was so good, and excited to see who we're going to learn about next. If you want to reach out to us, you always can. allegorystorypodcast@gmail.com, allegory story podcast on Instagrammy. We're out and about, and we're around. Our kitties are around, like our cats. That sounded weird. I didn't mean it like that. My cat jumped in my lap just as I said it. I was trying to tie it back to the cats, guys. Anyways, you know where to find us.
We'll see you next time.
See you soon.